Hey everybody. So I wanted to now address the whole aspect of that. It seems when I'm talking about Atlantis, or everything I've heard about Atlantis, this is technologically advanced place, but while there's allusions to its spirituality, there also seems to be some discounting of its spirituality. On the same note, so I'm going to call them, if we want to look at the modern division between religion and science, okay? This is what I would say the difference is between Lemuria and Atlantis. Okay, you could say Lemuria was religious and Atlantis was scientific. However, I don't like those terms, because I could also say that Atlantis was religious in the sense of, because scientists are rigid, don't have much room for spurious thinking. They really want something to be well thought out, well planned. They want to dig and dig until they find something. Curiosity is strong in the mind of a scientist. So I really don't see there being much difference between religion and science, in the sense of people that are really religious have this set doctrine that they have to follow. There's no deviation from it. And in both camps, you can easily be called a heretic. You could be ran off as crazy, whatever. So there is spirituality, though. And spirituality is not religious, because spirituality is a lot more free flow. It gets really hard to define this. Lots of people have defined the difference between religion and spirituality, so I'll let you go and find somebody that has actually defined this much better than I can. Suffice it to say that, let's just say that Atlantis was religious scientific, okay? Which does indicate a connection to God, source, whatever you want to call it, the Great Spirit or something like that, okay? They had a spirituality, but it was very dogmatic. Didn't have much freedom really of expression. Emotions weren't really a part of it. Really much like a lot of our religions today. They're very masculine, very patriarchal, okay? And then you have what I consider feminine is spiritual. Okay, and this isn't, again, saying that there is any hierarchy. We need to get rid of this idea of hierarchy as spiritual being better than religious. Because, well, that's just the way I tended to think, that a spiritual person was better than a religious person, because a religious person gets tied down by all this dogma and stuff, and a spiritual person, basically, I heard it defined once as, the spiritual person has been to the gates of hell, and they're fine with that. They're not trying to avoid that, but they're also not stuck on any one idea. I don't know. Never mind. See, I'm confusing myself, and this is what's making this message not quite work. But I had to get this out, even though I knew that this particular part was very confusing for me. Now, another theory or idea I've come across in my writing, and what's been going on with me over the past year, is that there's a lot of people that want to praise the spirits. That was another reason I wasn't too accepted among the shamanic community, because I'm like, you don't need to supplicate the spirits. They either work with you or they don't. But you don't need to do anything special to gain their favor or whatever. And in fact, I don't really think that shows that you are very strong. You know what, I don't know. I never had to. I just had this open line of communication of whoever I wanted to talk to. I just had to basically state a name, and there they would be. But people also want to sit there and say that the higher self is in control. of everything, and we need to turn everything over to God, the higher self, spirit, whatever. You know, that basically, and we need to get rid of ego, that we humans have no room for existence. This is the whole religious idea of needing to transcend above the earthly cares. So you need to achieve enlightenment or go up to heaven, that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the light. And, you know, you have to go to confessional and confess all your sins. And, you know, being a human is just sinful. And in the Buddhist or Eastern traditions, you know, it's the idea that rise above these earthly cares. You're bound by all these attachments and whatever, and you shouldn't be attached to this human world. It's the idea of get rid of your humanity. Okay, so now there's this popular idea of you need to get rid of your ego. And, oh, and then your inner child, well, you know, they're just this part that runs amok, that's creating all these problems for you, and you need to heal this inner child and get it under control and be the parent, in essence. None of that sat well with me. I was like, but I like ego. I like the idea of this higher self. I like the idea of the inner child. But I subscribe more to Freud's thing of the id, ego, and superego. And then it started becoming apparent to me what it all meant to me. My higher self, it only knows so much. It's not like this all-knowing being. It is in the spirit realm, but my child self is also in the spirit realm. My higher self represents more of my upper three chakras, my crown chakra, my third eye, and my throat chakra. My child self represents my lower three, the base, the navel, and the solar plexus. I came to understand that the lower three were feminine because they were attached more to our animal instincts or of the earth, and our upper three were more masculine because they were attached to the spirit realm and of, you know, Father Sky or God, or however you want to put that. I really started looking at it as Mother Earth and Father Sky. It started making sense to me that way, even though I still say God. God really represents just that original source. So Christians look at me as, well, you can't talk to spirits and stuff because that makes you evil. Everything still is below God. That gets complicated. I'm trying to lay out a theology that I've taken a lot of time and effort to build for myself. And eventually it will all come out. But once again, everything is really random and scattered in my mind. Welcome to my mind. It's crazy. You sure you want to come take a ride? So now, the ego. What's going on with the ego? The ego, there is nothing wrong with your ego. It is the I am. It is that part of us that needs to declare, I am human. I am not a spirit, nor am I an animal. I am. What does that mean? Okay? So there is nothing wrong with our ego. We need our ego. It is, if you follow Freud's saying, it's the mediator between the higher self and the lower self. And I came to understand the higher self as really, there was this part of me that all through my life was tormenting me to get better, do better, I was never good enough, keep trying. You can't meet the status quo. You have to always, she just pushed me so hard to succeed, way beyond all humane limits. I look back on myself, I'm like, oh my God, I was so horrible to myself. No wonder I broke down at like 33. Or something like that. And then of course my child, she was there too. I looked at it as most people they basically lose, their inner child is born around puberty, and and that child becomes separated from the self as the higher self, the superego, starts to take over. We lose our child innocence. So we break off this child innocence because we're losing it. We're growing up. We're developing morality and whatever. We separate this child self off so that way we will always have it. This is our connection to God. It's our purity. To enter the kingdom of heaven, we must be as the children, right? So, but both are spiritual. Both are of God. But you have your higher self, which everyone typically considers of spirit, you know. But now spirits, interestingly enough, don't have compassion for humans or human limits. And I started realizing that people let spirits get away with a lot of really bad behavior. Okay, it is time for us to stand in our human selves and say enough. And so this was another thing that I wasn't going to let spirits push me around. And I wasn't going to sit there and let them wake me up in the middle of the night or whatever. I've been working really hard to say, this is my space, now leave me alone. It's happening. We're developing, you know, that, but I have to uncover a lot of stuff that I have buried, a lot of programs and conditioning, that is part of my shadow self. So I have become a shadow worker. I heard this other guy channeling someone named Adronis, and everything that Adronis is saying, you know, about shadow worker and stuff like, and just a whole bunch of stuff. I was like, oh, that all makes sense too. You know, I mean, in the past like week or so, I've just gotten like so many. I've been led to so many, or a few different sources, like 4 different sources, and I'm like, that makes sense. That makes sense. Oh, I'm finally starting to make sense to myself. It was great. The ego, though, has all of this conditioning. If you want to put it as the, let's just use the Christian terms of the devil, the tempter. You know, you could say the Arkans or the Anunnaki or something like that has come to enslave us and keep our thoughts under control. They're all part of the tempter. Okay, this is all part of that free will experiment that we were given, and I believe this is explained, perfectly laid out in the book of Job, where God is boasting about Job, and Satan says, yeah, but that's because you give him everything. Now let me take away everything, and let's see then how he praises you. You know, I don't think that experiment ever ended. I think that was the beginning of the free will experiment, is can humans find their way back to God if they have to go through all this? So that, I know, brings up the uncomfortable thing of, well, that means God is in league with the devil. Exactly. God created it all. God is all. Knowledge is neutral. It's just what we do with it that makes it bad or good or whatever. But we humans also only have the ability to bifurcate, divide, and judge things. We never have learned wisdom. So that is where we need to go, is we need to learn wisdom. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to set our priorities straight and do shadow work and eliminate all these attachments to our ego that try to tell us how we should be living, and we need to learn to live in our I self. Another guy named Trevor Ilesley was talking about be me. You need to be yourself, your true self, what you were created to be. Beamism. Beamism. I loved how he said that. Beamism is like, yeah, that made total sense too. And what else was there? Cleanse the ego. Now, because what I started going through a few months ago was I had gone so deep into this shadow work, Valley of the Shadow of Death, you know, Dark Night of the Soul, and losing my faith in humanity utterly, that is there anything redeemable about humanity, because it seems like all we want to do is hurt each other, and that's all we're capable of doing is hurting each other. And it doesn't matter how good of a person I try to be, because another person's traumas and injuries, they're always going to believe that I'm attacking them. And we live in this society where we are constantly, you know, it is eat or be eaten. You know, everyone feels like the victim of everyone else, but then they go out and prey on everyone else, you know, P-R-E-Y, not A-Y. But they're hunting others. You know, it's that eat or be eaten, kill or be killed. And I'm like, is this really all that there is about society? And I went into this really deep depression, and at one point tried to get Jeannie back. I guess this has been this whole summer. You know, late spring, early summer. I tried to get Jeannie back. I'm like, please, unless I don't know what happened, but I need you because I cannot love anymore. I don't think love even exists anymore. I don't think it is possible for humans to love each other. And if I don't have you back, I know I have failed. Or I don't really even know what it was. It was something really crazy within me. But it was a wake-up call. It got me to wake myself up and remind myself that I just need to look. It's still there, but I need to unbury it. And this is when I really started understanding the whole thing of rebirthing my ego to be born again. I had to cleanse it, scrub it. I've known this for a year and a half, 2 years, whatever. I've known this. But it became really clear once I had this little breakdown of saying, unless I had this person that I considered to be my twin flame, that it wasn't, life wasn't worth living, and that I wasn't worth anything, and that wasn't going to fly. So ultimately, though, if I'm just going based on terminology, that was the death of my ego. So that's kind of perplexing. Here I'm saying that we need our ego, but I was working really hard on what I didn't realize it was beamism, but that's exactly what it was. And all of a sudden there's this ego death. And I am now left here. Who am I? I don't have any illusions that I lived off of before. I don't have anything that tells me. I don't really have anything to orient through society anymore. Every little bit of illusion that I clung to or identified myself by is gone. So who am I? And I realized this was the true ego. It had been living under conditioning for so long, being told how to live, being given a standard by which to live. Just conditioning. There's a word I'm looking for. I can't think of it though. So you do all this work and you end up with this really raw part of yourself. It is your I self, now scrubbed clean, purified. You know, this is the pruning, the ultimate finality of the pruning process of God. And here I was, I had nothing left, and I was in surrender. And then I started realizing, now I can write who I am. Okay, so what that comes down to is that all culminated in my realization today of the throat chakra. And I've been wondering, well, where does this ego sit? Where is the center of ego? Now, ego being your I am, your sense of your human self. Your human self has to marry the animal and the spirit, the matter and the spirit. There has to be something in between mind and heart. Throat. This throat is the seat of ego. And it's either the damaged ego that goes about hurting everybody else, just trying to gain some sort of love, but how can we gain love if we can't even give love or recognize what love is? Because most of the time we're too blind to love because of our own hurts that we're carrying around, our own pains that we can't heal, because we don't know that we're supposed to heal it, and we still live very much under all of this controlled thinking. Other entities in our head telling us what to do. That was another how I started really fighting myself. I'm like, get the hell out of my head. You know, and really just being really a Queen of Swords in the tarot of slash this, slash that, too many options, you know, like the Seven of Cups. You know, there's just too much going on here. None of this makes any sense at all. Too many mirrors. I'm in a house of mirrors. And I just really started realizing, paying attention and realizing that there was many different voices in my head. And schizophrenics are just a little bit more sensitive to these voices. But now I'm starting to become sensitive I mean, I had been sensitive, but I'm now starting to identify what they are. And I'm like, get out of my life. This is my life. So my point with this whole Lemuria and Atlantis thing is that remnant from Atlantis that converted to Lemurian beliefs. They managed to combine these two, but they got lost in the guilt. They started to backpedal, and I don't know really what happened. That wasn't quite clear to me what happened to them. Other than they got lost in this guilt. So I don't know if they ended up destroying themselves or whatever. But I realized I identified with this third energy. This birth of the bride and the bridegroom, the child. That was the marriage between the left and the right hemisphere. They are the corpus callosum. And if you want to look at that, they are the throat chakra. That in between the mind and the heart. I also started going to Catholic church. And I loved it. That it was in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit representing wisdom, And so I realized that the throat chakra here, and see, I'm also having a lot of neck pain, and which I heard was throat chakra stuff, but it just like, it all came to me this morning, that this is responsible for my ego. It's not just a simple banal thing of, well, I need to speak my truth, because everybody in this world can go around speaking their truth, and we're not any closer to stopping wars. In fact, we're starting wars. And as one thing I've asked the question several times. It's one thing to go around and sit there and try to be spiritual and say, you're toxic, you're hurting me, I'm leaving you behind. You can cut all this stuff out and say that everyone's projecting, and that's what I consider first stage shadow work, where it's everybody else's fault. Then you can move into the mode of second stage shadow work. Well, everyone has their shadows, yeah, but my shadows are much worse than anyone else's. I've done all this stuff, I've hurt you, I'm sorry, and it's just, I keep getting triggered, and I don't know what to do. That's second stage. Then I started realizing, once I came back from paradise, that there was a third stage, from botched paradise, that there was a third stage. And the third stage was about, I understood, finding my sense of I. Because I realized I couldn't give everyone this proverbial get out of jail free card and never honor myself. It was like, okay, I know I did this stuff, but they did this stuff too. So how do I create that relationship where I worked through my stuff? I mean, I didn't want to be the only shadow worker, but it seemed like that's what relationships with me were about, was I was the only shadow worker, and everyone else could go around being as naive and dumb and whatever they wanted to be, act however they wanted to in their very conditioned egos. And that's when I really started losing my hope in humanity. Don't think I'm ever gonna, I don't know if anybody is really capable of finding their true self, getting rid of all this garbage. So, to speak in the throat chakra has to go deeper than I'm going to speak my truth. I believe the purpose of it ultimately is that creation of relationship. How do you get along? How do we get along? How can we marry the left and the right, the bride and the bridegroom, the male and masculine and feminine? This is about our inner unity here. So I don't really know what that means, but it has something to do with being able to have the right brain and the left brain working together. It's not like it's matriarchal or patriarchal or masculine, logical versus feminine, oneness, creativity, whatever. They have to work together. It's kind of like an experiment was done one time to identify the purpose of the corpus callosum. And some people that had some brain damage right there, they were trying to figure out, well, what really was the purpose of this corpus callosum? And they started realizing that without the corpus callosum, if they were to cover one eye or the other, each of those eyes, obviously your right eye goes directly back to your right brain, your left eye goes back to your left brain. I think I just mixed that up. Remember, I'm dyslexic, okay? But I don't know if the eyes actually cross over at the corpus callosum. They might. I don't really know. But I do know, like, a lot of the stuff, the nerves and stuff coming up our back, and they end up crossing over. So what's from the right side of the body ends up being controlled by the left head and, you know, brain and whatever. So, but they figured out by covering these eyes that the person could only describe or understand this image from a very right or left brain perspective. And that their understanding of this image was very incomplete. Because usually the brain hemispheres work together, and these individuals had found a way to get past this and figured out how to get their brain to work together. But when the scientists actually teased out the difference between what each eye is seeing, they were able to understand how these two hemispheres actually process information entirely differently. So now you have the masculine, you know, like you can go back to Venus and Mars. The masculine is Mars and the feminine is Venus. And how do you get those two to come together? So first you have to find unity in yourself, and then you can find unity with another. But the masculine and feminine energy, just by their very nature, seem to be at odds with each other. So it's that question of, well, how do you build relationship? Relationship where we actually get along. And there is none of this projection, reflection, endless crap happening. Because it's endless, I swear. Almost 30 minutes here. I've been rambling on. Thank you for listening. Bye.